Okay, well, I'm sure a few more people will be joining us very shortly. I think given it's nearly a couple of minutes past, we're going to get started. So thanks everyone for joining us. My name's Matthew Jones and I'm on the investment team at Anthemis. We're an early stage venture capital firm and I'm very pleased to be moderating today's webinar, which has been organised by the teams at Baloise Group and Sparkworks on the future of mobility. How we move from point to point, how long that journey takes, the risks involved, and the thinking behind why we choose the modes of transport that we do are fascinating topics at the best of times. And yet at these strange coronavirus affected times, these questions, I think, have become only more and more interesting and worth exploring. And so today in this session by Baloise and Sparkworks titled The Future of Mobility, I'm going to be asking some of their experts about some of the work that they've been doing in mobility and about how COVID is impacting their profession. So to start with, I'm going to ask each of our participants to just give us one quick line on themselves and their background. So let's get started by hearing from today's contributors. Patrick.
Yes, hello. Thanks for having me. Yes, maybe I can explain a little bit more also about Baloise and what we are doing here in this field, because maybe not everybody in this webinar knows what Baloise is doing. Baloise is an insurance company and we are really focusing on our core business. We are happy with our core business in Europe. But as you know, insurance is a business under pressure, to be honest. So we have to be careful and look how can we stay relevant in the system also in the future. And that's why we are also investing money and time and resources and things in the future. 2040 is a long time to go, but let's see. So that's what's Baloise' role here. I'm part of Baloise in the group, responsible for the mobility topic since a few months, to be honest. So before that, investing in early stage startups. So knowing the scene a little bit, looking into the future is important, and being part of the future is important.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. Anna, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your role at Baloise and what you've been working on.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Matthew, and hello to everyone. And thank you for joining this webinar today. So I'm Anna. I work as an innovation manager at Baloise, and my focus has been internal innovation. So first of all, of course, having our employees being involved in our innovation activities, passing on methods, skills, technologies, etc., to our employees so that they can follow up on their innovation ideas and projects. But of course, also trying to establish conditions that allow us to be more innovative and also gain knowledge that allows us to be more innovative. And one part of that, one focus there was building knowledge in mobility, one of our focus areas. So I've been working on researching trends in mobility and doing that together with Sparkworks. And we'll, of course, talk a lot more about that later on.
Thank you very much. Well, that leads us very neatly onto Alan from Sparkworks.
Hi, Matthew. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Alan Cabello. I'm one of the co-founders of Sparkworks. We're an innovation company, a strategic innovation company, we call it. We're based in Zurich and in London. And we essentially help our clients develop new products, services, or business models. And in doing so, we also work on how to make this process of creation and co-creation part of that organization. And as this, we've been working with Baloise for over a year on different projects. This is one of them.
Excellent, thank you. So just before we jump in today, just to let everyone know a little bit about how we're going to structure this session. So we'll probably spend the next 25 minutes or so walking through some questions that I've prepared and that I'm looking forward to putting to our experts here. Throughout the session, you will be able to submit Q&A for the session that we will have after these 25 minutes. So we'll probably do around 15 minutes, up to 15 minutes of Q&A. So if there's something that one of our panelists says that you think is really interesting, or if you'd like to learn more, or if you think there's something that they haven't mentioned that you'd like to get their opinion on, please do feel free to get in touch using the Q&A feature within the Zoom application. And we'll be getting to those questions, as I said, in around 25 minutes or so. And really no questions are off limits, so please feel free to go crazy, and I'm sure the experts here will be happy to answer anything. So Alan, staying with you. So as I understand it, you have, together with Baloise, developed a study called The Future of Mobility in 2040. Now, 2040 is a long way away, or at least it feels to me like it's a long way away. Tell me about the study and how this came about.
So people have a hard time conceptualizing 20 years in the past or the future. But really 20 years ago, there was no iPhone. We still had recording machines. The internet was in its infancy. So 20 years is actually a pretty far time forward. We follow a process called a STEEP methodology. So we look at trends in social, technological, economical, ecological, and political domains. And we develop these trends talking to experts in each one of these fields, but also extreme users. Think about being vegan 20 years ago. That sounded really, really weird 20 years ago. Now it's the kind of the norm. So what we do is we talk to these experts, these what we call extreme users, and then we try to mesh these different trends together. And we create scenarios to be able to illustrate a story around how these trends are progressing. So this is not an exact science, far from it. But the idea is that it puts us in a different frame to be able to think, okay, what would happen if X, Y, and Z did happen? And then what would be the cause and effects after that?
So, Patrick, why did you end up looking at 2040? That, you know, why not 2030 or even 2050?
That's a funny question, to be honest. Yes, why? Because it's still realistic in 20 years from now. So it's not, I don't know, 2080, and we're thinking about crazy stuff. It's close enough to the world today, but it's far enough to say, yes, really things will change. So we discussed it a little bit, what is it? And then we came out 2040 is a good range. And of course we listened, or we have had some reports before we have seen, and it is about 20 years is a good time framing. And as Alan mentioned already, so if you think about, I will add it more from a mobility perspective, Google Maps 20 years ago, no. Tesla, no. So all the things also in mobility 20 years ago, yes, we moved by cars from A to B. And it was a time where I already have had a driver license, but it was different. And so it's 20 years is something you can feel, you can imagine, but it is long enough to think, as Al mentioned, also in wider and not to stick too close to the existing things. And what's maybe important, and I think we'll talk about that later, the trends we developed are in a time horizon 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years, where we said, when will the impact be the biggest? We have identified trends, and will it be a big impact in 5 years, 10 or 20 years? So there is, it's not we are only looking 20 years in the future. There are things which will happen much earlier, or we think will happen much earlier. And so it's not only 20 years in the future we're looking at.
If I may add to that, if you think about startups like Mobileye in Israel, with autonomous driving, that research project started 20 years ago. And when they started, everybody's like, are you crazy? Autonomous driving? So that is from a tech standpoint, that's a nice.
Yep. Interesting. Anna, so what were the results of the study that you did? I understand that there were some scenarios that came out of the work. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, exactly. So there were two main outputs of this whole study. So the first one were the trends that were already mentioned quite a few times. And the second one were the scenarios, which are stories basically that help us to get the trends into a more discussable format and a more imaginable format. So it's really 4 different stories that play in the future and describe how 4 personas live in the future. And all these scenarios, of course, are incorporating the trends that we have researched, but they build a story around them. So it really is a starting point for a discussion about the trends, and it gives an image of how a future could look like. And of course, this is not an exact what we think the future will be. It's more kind of like cornerstones in between which the future will play.
Excellent, thank you. And what about the trend radar that you developed?
Yes, so the trend radar is more our tool to link all the trends to what we do in the mobility project in terms of initiatives. So we have all the knowledge behind these trends, and of course we want to link that to what we're actually doing today. And the trend radar, first of all, gives us a view of the landscape of what mobility might look like in the future and which trends will affect this future, and then allows us also to map our own projects on this radar and to see how different investment opportunities look from a trend perspective. So the radar kind of links the abstract knowledge, if you want, to what we're actually doing today, and allows us to use all these trends as a tool for decision making, and also putting into perspective the things that we do today.
Thank you. So before we go a little bit deeper, I just want to remind everyone that you can use the Q&A feature within Zoom. So if there are some topics that are now coming up that you think are particularly interesting, please feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A feature, and we will get around to them in just over 15 minutes or so. So let's take a moment to step back. Alan, what is your take on the outputs from this study? I mean, are they realistic in your view?
I think there's being a predictor of the future is always kind of a strange way of seeing things, because all you need to do is get 2 points accurately, and then like, hey, look, I called it, right? When you have that for the stock market, you got back to Nostradamus. So it's relatively easy in the sense that, hey, look, point A and point B happened. I think for us, really what's interesting is what are the causes and effects that if this happens, then what starts trickling down? Everything is connected. And I think if you think about these storylines, they describe basically what happens if this happens, if that happens. Of course, there's a lot of other things around it, but I think this gives us a framework to start thinking about the future. And like, hey, it's going to be very different from how it is now.
Patrick, what's your take?
Yes, to be honest, for me, it's really difficult talking or trying to think in these scenarios. So I was really happy to have the Sparkworks colleagues, more the guys and ladies thinking in this direction, because I'm really struggling. But based on the work we did together, we asked kids, we asked experts, we invited a lot of people. The team worked heavily on the stuff to combine trends, the STEEP approach, which is very helpful because it's a, let's say, 360-degree perspective on it. So for me, it was really difficult to dive in, but after having these exchanges and the first, not greenfield, not launching it by myself, it was really fruitful to think about it. And again, looking back, there was, and it was shown, I think, Alan, you shared it with me, there was a video from the IBM lab or something like that, more than 20 years ago. And what they described there, and the video, it was about what we are using today, like an iPhone, like someone is talking to me, with the computer is talking to me, it's organizing my life. That's crazy. This is more than 20 years ago. So it's not, oh, let's have fun and do crazy stuff. There is really something in it. What's difficult, to be honest, is really then to find a way what's really relevant, whatever relevant means. What can I learn? I have to place a lot of bets. It's not only that's the way, let's do it. You have to be flexible because you do not know what will happen exactly, but it gives you a guidance. It's not let's do everything. At the end, you have a kind of North Star, still vague, but it's a North Star, and that's really important. And of course, you cannot go through the studies and say, yes, this happens, this happens, this happens. It's really something more. You have to spend time on it.
Thank you. If I understand correctly, and this is for you, Anna, if I understand correctly, the study was largely conducted, I think, before the impact of coronavirus. How do you think that coronavirus is going to impact the conclusions coming from this work, if at all?
Sorry, that was for Anna or for me?
Anna, yeah, sorry.
Very good, cool. From what we can see now, I would say it's not that anything is proven wrong, but a lot of the things that we can see is that trends that we have seen and identified already are accelerated a lot through the impact of Corona. Of course, all the work-related things like the webinar that we have right now, but also a lot more meetings that would usually happen physically are now happening virtually, or even with virtual reality. So it's really a big push on many things that were already in the study that are just happening much, much earlier now than we would have thought. So I think generally it's not really reversing many trends, but more accelerating them and pushing them ahead. But of course, we have to see how this will be in the long run, because now we just had Corona, or we still have Corona, and we'll have to see how it is in 5 years, whether this really stays up at the level that we have it now, or whether there's a bit of a slump after the whole crisis calmed down a little bit.
So I noticed on the slide that we have here, there was one of the scenarios that said digital Venice. So and that referred to a collapse of the global travel industry due to climate change, and that becoming a catalyst for new virtual realities and industries. In any of your work, did any of you ever predict a global pandemic, or did that one go under the radar a little bit?
No, pandemic was not part of the, we had drought. We had a couple of different like extreme scenarios. And again, that one was interesting because it talked about the financial, let's say, loss that you would have because of people not being able to travel. The travel industry, I think, is 10 to 15% of the GDP of Europe. So if you cut that out, you start affecting dramatically the livelihoods of a lot of people. So that was like, and this is one sentence within the, but even there you see, wow, okay, now we have this, we can't travel. A lot of people are suffering because of that, financially, et cetera. And there's a lot of repercussions that keep on going.
But maybe I can hook in, Matthew, if it's fine for you.
Please.
What's interesting, I can remember a call from you, Alan, about digital Venice. So the starting point here was there is I think it was the sea level is getting higher and higher, and there is a flood in Venice or something like that. And end of the year last year, it was closely, or beginning of the year this year, closely before we have finished the study, exactly that happens. So Venice was closed because there was a flood. Also because the sea level is going up and up. So it's there you see there's really a link to the things, and things happen much earlier and others later. And going back to what Anna said, the new normal, what we see all in the reports is traveling by plane is going down, and with most studies says it will stay at a lower level. And this has a huge impact on using a car, using public transportation, using bikes in the cities. So there's really a big movement in how we move from A to B. And this is so interesting because we are really in it. So we are trying to find new opportunities, offering new solutions. That's why it is so interesting. And the link here with Venice, as you mentioned, Matthew, is really impressive, I would like to say, yeah.
Yeah, and now one of you has to predict next week's lottery numbers for me, if that's okay. You seem to be good at this predictions business. Well, so thank you to the first person that submitted a question. So thank you very much, and we'll get to that very, very soon. Patrick, staying with you, Baloise is obviously an insurance company. Really interesting that an insurance company did this kind of study. What is the impact on Baloise in your view? How do you think you'll be using the results of the work that you've done?
Yeah, so first, maybe let me ask your first question. Why are we interested in that? Insurance business will be our business, hopefully, for the next 150 years. We're existing more than 150 years. Hopefully, the next 150 years, we will do insurance. But there is a shift, digitalization, and you know it. So I do not have to mention all the stuff. So insurance is under pressure. We have to think, how can we do insurance differently and better? But do we have a chance in a world with such fast changes, especially in mobility, to build a new business or be part of that and to offer to clients and new solutions? So that's what we are doing here. So really thinking about new businesses beside insurance, but of course using our assets, whatever that means. So we are still figuring out. So how do we use that study? First of all, it helps us to check, we check our ideas, new ideas, what we would like to do against this trend radar. And then we can, for example, we have 4 or 5 ideas, then we have a spider in this trend radar and can see, okay, how is it correlated? How does it fit together? Is it only one trend we are building on, or is it more trends? So that's how we use it. So really checking new ideas again, the trend radar. Another one is identify new opportunities. If you ask people on the streets, what are your needs or what keeps you awake at night, you get a very solid and good answer. But it will be not, okay, what do you need in 10 years from now? Because nobody is thinking in 10 to 20 years steps. So if you would like to have an awareness and think about the future in 20 years, you must have something like that. And this must be specific for Baloise. That's why we decided to develop it for Baloise, because there are other trend studies from Asia, from the US, but we are focusing on Europe currently. So we have to have an understanding from Baloise perspective, what's going on in our world, let's say. So that's really important to identify new opportunities. And last but not least, it's important if you would like to get in touch with partners, you must have an opinion about that stuff, because they are saying, hey, we think the future will look like that. We're building now this venture, or we're investing in that. And then it is very useful if you also have an opinion. Oh, that sounds great. We are on the same way. Let's do it together. Or no, we are not interested because we think that things will turn in a different way. So interesting conversation, but nothing we should do together. So that's the third point. So partnering and identify partners with the same idea and maybe going in the same direction is the last point what we are doing with that study.
Thanks, Patrick. Alan, moving to you, do you think that the challenges around the future of mobility are more technology related or more people, social, human behavior challenges? What's your take based on what you've learned from the study? You're on mute, Alan.
Yeah, sorry. So we mentioned that these 5 social, technological, economical, ecological, political. If I go one by one quickly, social changes happen kind of at a relatively slow pace, unless there's like a clear thing happening. Like right now, the pandemic, everybody's locked home, so it causes a shift. You need to do something repeatedly for, I think, 20 days so you form a habit. From a technological standpoint, everything advances at a steady pace. So here you have a kind of a faster rate that's going forward. Ecological things also happen at a steady decline. The world is getting warmer. There's different things happening. So that's kind of in a very, very steady state. We're not going to change that dramatically. Economic is tied very much to the social. And then the political happens in 5-10 year periods. So if you put all these things, all these different rates of change together, you realize, yes, technology can help, but it's only until there's a social aspect that pushes it forward that we get to a point forward. So this conference call we're having right now, who the hell would have signed up for this 8 months ago? So it's just because we've gotten to the point where we're moving forward. Now, if you ask me specifically for mobility, I think we need, from a political standpoint, right now, you can look up all the large infrastructure projects that are going to happen in the next 20 years. That's been decided because it takes a long time for these things to do. So, and you need someone asking the questions like, what about the political aspect? If you don't have the political will, there's not going to be flying taxis in Switzerland in the next 20 years. Period. That's just not going to happen. So that has nothing to do with technology. So you need to measure all these different things and try to kind of connect those dots.
Mm-hmm. I think we are going to come back to that in just a second. Before we do, Patrick, you've been working with startups that are looking at topics as exciting as flying taxis. What startups have you seen that are the most exciting in the mobility ecosystem?
That's not the easiest question, to be honest. We have seen quite a lot of startups in mobility, offering bike sharing, e-scooter, and all this stuff. That's nice, but when you're asking me what's really amazing, I think I can remember one startup in Israel that was developed. It is very successful, developing a hardware for autonomous cars, and it is a solution. It's a sensor like as a camera. But they can look through fog, rain, night, whatever. It's so amazing when you see it. It's a small hardware tool, But it's so amazing what they can do. And they have showed me that on the street in Israel, and it was really, I can remember, it's 2 years ago now. And this is really interesting. So we have this big autonomous vehicle stuff, and then this small item, which this kind of technology maybe is a game changer. And they, again, doing very successful with big US companies now. And another one, what I'm really fascinating me is the electric vehicle stuff and all around it. Also e-scooters, for example, because it's lowering the costs how to get from A to B comfortable. So it changes our behavior using a public transportation or using individual transportation. And that's very interesting when you look at it. So it's not the only thing which is, so well, this startup is crazy and interesting. It's really more the whole mobility space. How maybe there's one company I remember, which is really crazy what they do. So you can drive by with your car, and they have some radar and sensors and whatever. You can drive 40 miles per hour, and they do a digital print in this milliseconds you're driving by, and saying you, hey, your tire has to be changed because it's not the newest one or whatever. Or they can scan the whole car by driving with 40 miles per hour across the station. That's really crazy when you see it. I haven't found any solution for that we can use as insurance, but the investment was too expensive because they were too big already. But it's really a crazy and interesting technology, let's say.
Interesting. Let's go to, we've got a couple of questions here through Q&A. Let's maybe go to those now. A question from Amir, and I'm going to leave it open to whichever of the panelists would like to take this one first. I wonder if any changes in the mobility or anything else with severe economic, ecological, or etc. consequences is possible without radical changes in regulation. For example, if one-manned vehicles can drive on the streets in parallel, we've seen that in the past from electric vehicles to autonomous driving. Maybe change in regulation will take a lot longer over the next 20 years. Who would like to say, Alan, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, these things happen either kind of 5-year shifts normally, but there are accelerators. And again, where we are right now, if you would have imagined government giving out money the way they have in the last couple of years to businesses, to individuals, to freelancers, if you would have told me that 4 months ago, I would have told you you're crazy. It's impossible. It's never going to happen. And yet it has. So there are certain events that cause it. And I think this is the interesting part, because we are in a life-changing event for mobility and for a lot of other things. So regulation changes relatively slowly unless something happens. We've done work with airline industries and airport security. 9/11 caused dramatic changes in airport security. And now we're trying to reverse engineer the things we didn't fix so well at that point. So we need certain moments to make those changes. And others are slowly. So it depends on what you need. Someone talks about infrastructure, the same story, I think.
So before we come to the infrastructure question, Patrick or Anna, anything to add on regulation and what you're seeing there?
Yes, maybe I can add. What we're seeing is regulation is really having an impact on innovation. So the regulator, of course, it has an impact on innovation. If you look at the US, for example, or at Asia, maybe Asia is the better example, China. The regulator says, yes, you can drive autonomous cars on the streets in specific areas. In Europe, it's still not allowed to have this level 3 cars on the street. So Audi now stopped their level 3 cars because they have issues with the regulator. So the regulation is so important. In Europe, it's really hindering us sometimes in the innovation part, especially when it comes to technology, new stuff, maybe 10, 20 years in the future. And so the US and Asia is really getting more and more away, or have a big advantage against us in Europe when it comes to these stuff here in mobility. Also react to stuff, be more flexible, things like this. And we observe in Europe, Switzerland also specifically, it takes too long, the regulator to change stuff. And this is what Al mentioned. If it's not on the radar now, you can wait for the next 20 years.
Thanks, Patrick. Anna, anything to add?
Just in the same direction that I think the other two already went. I think the general thing in Europe is that we're more reactive in our regulations. So we're more acting on trends that we see elsewhere rather than pushing through regulations to go ahead in terms of trends that we perceive important in the future. So yeah, I think because of that, it's necessary, definitely, but it will not be a driving factor behind new things emerging. It will more allow it once it's already there and seen in other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. And then another question here from Lotta, I hope I pronounced that correctly. What about the necessary infrastructure? I guess this is a broader point, right? Which is that, you know, almost regardless of the scenario that you might be looking at in this report, there are pieces of infrastructure that are necessary and that need to be, you know, built and invested in over the next period. You know, how straightforward is that, and what is, you know, what about, as the question says, what about the necessary infrastructure to make some of this happen?
Maybe I can answer to that, sorry. What is interesting, I'm sitting here in my home office, so the whole infrastructure is there. So things which are not relied to a huge infrastructure setup, we have to build a tunnel or whatever, or an airport in Berlin or something like this, which took us many years more than planned originally. Things can happen like that, and this is not a plan of infrastructure. Yes, of course, it was planned that I can sit here, so I have enough data transfer and all the stuff. But what does infrastructure means? You have the mix of these huge projects you have to plan and takes 20, 30, 40 years. These are the mega projects. But on the other side, the infrastructure for home office was or is in a lot of countries already established and has a huge impact on mobility. So I quit my my monthly ticket for the train because I'm not traveling so much. So I've now shifted a little bit more to my car back. So what means infrastructure in this new mobility setup? Infrastructure is laptop, computer, all the things here around that enables me. And we very often have in mind flying cars. What do we have to establish when it comes to flying cars? It's a mix. You have this big, huge things, but there are a lot of small items, which at the end gives a big picture on infrastructure and mobility.
Thanks, Patrick. Anna, Alan, anything to add to the infrastructure question?
Just to add maybe a different perspective on the infrastructure question, a lack of infrastructure can also lead to innovation on a smaller level. So it's not just what we have that enable us to build upon, but also what doesn't exist in certain towns or regions or even countries that pushes innovation into other directions and maybe even jumps one infrastructure, let's say public transport, that, you know, innovation goes into a totally different direction. So it can also trigger reactions that go in different directions than if you have certain infrastructure already in place.
That's a great point. Alan, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, you have a couple of examples, like digital currency in Kenya and peso. There was no physical banks, so they started this. You have the first Wi-Fi, town Wi-Fi's were Indian reservations in the US. MIT guys went over because AT&T could not have hold over that. So yes, again, the lack of infrastructure something helps. And also you're seeing now the city of Zurich there's a lot of debate about bike infrastructure for biking and giving more space to bikes versus cars. So I think the infrastructure question is interesting. It needs the right shove or the right creativity to find that space for innovation.
Mm-hmm. Really great. I love this question from Yuri. I'm going to put this to you, Patrick. Which trends in mobility worry or maybe even scare you most from a perspective of an insurance company, given the importance of the motor business for you? This is a question that I think a lot of people have talked about. Sorry to put you on the spot. I'll come to you next, Anna.
Or Anna, would you like to jump in? I've never heard this question before. Yeah, not really scaring or worry about, because I think there will, or we are convinced there will be still a need for a kind of insurance when it comes to mobility. A different kind of insurance, not the same we see today. And of course, we are a classical P&C insurer, so plus minus 30% of our business is motor insurance. We are happy with that. And there will be a shift. We have the scenarios in our core countries, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, and we're thinking about it. And overall, we think the whole premium in insurance and mobility will go down when it comes to individual insurance. But when we're talking about companies taking risks, autonomous cars and so on and so forth, This is also in part we taking care about, and this is especially why, knowing that we can be best in class, but we think this premium goes down, risk goes down, we have to look into other spaces where we can use our assets, our skills, beside insurance, and to be a sustainable company in the future too. So that's so important. Yes, we know it will go down. We do not know when exactly, but we have to be prepared. And to be prepared means we have to start now, and we already started a few years ago, with new things and experiments.
Excellent, thank you. Anna, anything to add?
Yeah, I also wouldn't pin it down to one specific trend that is specifically worrying, but one thing that the study really shows very nicely is how interconnected all the trends are, and that a development in one trend can really have huge impacts on many other trends, and in the end on mobility and us as a company. And also, if we look now at the situation, of course, we see how fast everything can go and how unpredictable it is. So it's one small thing, not even a trend, if you want, one small event that can really have effects on many things around and can unfold very quickly and unpredictably.
Another question here, Alan, I'll put this question to you first. So in 20 years' time, where will the level of, I think this is overall mobility, be volume-wise? Will it be higher or lower than where it is today?
That's that's an interesting, depends on the scenario. I think overall there is, like you see now, there's a trend towards localization. So I think it goes up and down. Let's say I grew up in we call it the EasyJet generation. I can get anywhere for $20, basically, and we push that hard. You know, if I would have told my father, it's crazy how quickly we got on a plane and went everywhere. And now we're looking at this more like, okay, let's take the camper, let's take the car, let's drive around here. And these long-term things, long distance travels become smaller. We don't like commuting. Nobody likes commuting, period. So if we
I live in London, I can confirm that, don't worry.
But so far, we didn't see, it was impossible for us to see a way around commuting somehow. It was impossible. And I have clients that have these huge buildings in the middle of nowhere where 5,000 people work. And the occupancy right now is 10%. Nobody wants to go, and they serve their employees, and nobody wants to go back to that. They're like, okay, well, we go twice a week. So overall, if you ask me, we're gonna, I think maybe the fun, the leisure mobility might stay the same or might increase. The mobility, because we had to, we might see that decrease. And most of our mobility from what we've seen is because we had to. So I'm thinking as I speak. So I think overall, yes, we will see a decrease in overall mobility. It'll just be smarter mobility, hopefully.
I think it's interesting. So I think it was the CEO of Barclays last week, or maybe a few weeks ago, said that he thinks that the days of having 7,500 people in one skyscraper might have come to an end. And you know, there are certain places, again, here in London, like Canary Wharf, you know, that have really been built on the idea that everyone comes together in huge buildings with big trading floors. So we'll see, I guess we'll see how that plays out. One more question here another one from Amir. Thank you, Amir. People, Patrick, I'll put this one to you again, if that's okay. People expect insurance to be stable. How fast can insurance shift without putting an insurance company's stability into question?
That's a really very good question. This is a fight we have more or less every day in the management, with the colleagues. What's doable, what's possible, not risking our core business, our entity, what is Baloise today, and at the same time knowing we have to act faster, looking at Amazon, you name it, how they do it, and can Baloise be in Amazon? No, we can't, of course. Can we have the same speed? Very difficult. The regular helps us that we're still existing without having the pace of others. So, but we know there is an end. So we are trying to test what's the best way for Baloise. Is it to shift the whole company? Is it to shift part of it to be more flexible? And really experimenting with a lot of things. And then it comes into the play, as you mentioned here, stability on the other hand, because we have still a core business insurance, we have to sell, we have to pay for claims. This is really difficult to be honest, to be a CEO of a company that's not the easiest times you can be a CEO of a company of Baloise. So it's a vague answer. So we are really testing it. I do not have an answer to that question.
Thank you very much. So I've got one more question from my side. I think we're coming up pretty close to the end of our session today. Anna, coming back to the future of mobility study, what was something from the work that you've done that you found interesting or surprising?
I think a big surprise for me, not surprise, but something that really impressed me was the multidimensionality of the whole topic. So if you talk about the future of mobility, there's a high chance that people will start thinking about self-driving cars, for instance. But there's probably not that high of a chance that people start thinking about political separatism or aging population. And to really discover how this still influences mobility and how it's kind of all linked was really fascinating for me.
Thank you. Alan, what about you? What did you learn during this process?
I was hoping we would have teleportation in 20 years, and it's not going to happen. That was my biggest disappointment. I think it's just how important mobility is to humanity, really. I mean, it sounds very philosophical, but it really, we've developed as a society from the start of time, moving around, and then that ability to move changed entire societies and countries, etc. So I think it's extremely important, and as Anna says, it's connected to a lot of other things around. So it's not just about self-driving cars, and self-driving cars sounds exciting, but probably the most boring part of the overall story. It's everything that goes around in order for you to have that, and how does that change children's going to school and their education, and old people's access to life, basically being able to go from point A to point B at a certain age, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's really, really interesting.
Interesting, thank you. And Patrick, finally, what are the key learnings or surprises on your side?
It's really complex. It's not an easy task. I have had in mind the 4 mega trends: sharing, connected cars, and all the stuff in mobility. But at the end, we ended up with more than 60 relevant trends, and they are relevant. So that was really a surprise how complex it is. And there's an interaction between. Another one was technology. Technology is a driver, as Al mentioned before, but without timing and environmental changes, technology is nothing. So technology is an enabler, but there must be more than only technology. Technology is nice, but timing, behavior is a lot more. And the last one is politics. In our study, we recognize that politics are not acting, they are reacting. So they are looking at things which happen in the next 5 years. So it's really, they are not proactive. So that's something Anna mentioned before. So in Europe, it's really, something comes up and then politics react. So it's really now and today. It's not really 10 years, 20 years from now, what we have seen. And that was not so positive from my perspective to see that.
Excellent, thank you. Well, look, thank you very much to you as our panelists, and thank you to everyone that has joined us on the call today, whether you were watching live and submitting questions or whether you are catching up with the recording later. There's been some really interesting things that we've discussed today. If you have any follow-up questions or would like to discuss some of the topics raised today, I'd like the panelists just to tell us how they can get in touch with you. Patrick?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, brilliant. Patrick Witt at LinkedIn, yeah, okay. And Alan? Same, excellent. And Anna?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, there we go. LinkedIn is now the platform of choice. Well, please do feel free to get in touch with the panelists on LinkedIn. They'll be very happy to continue the conversation. Thank you again from my side, and see you all soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Matthew.
Bye. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.